The Rings of Power as a show can be easily used as a case study of what not to do if you want to tell a compelling and engaging story that has multiple storylines and about a dozen characters. It doesn't really succeed in many areas. Okay, it's beautifully shot, but with $1 billion budget, I mean, yeah, you expect that much. But I mostly want to talk in this video of why Rings of Power doesn't work and why does the characters seem so one-dimensional and uninteresting. In general, whatever form of story you're writing, be it a book or a screenplay, it's always a good idea to start with character first and plot second. Usually the main character with all their flaws and needs and wants, they make difficult choices, be it good or bad, but ultimately, how the character reacts shapes the story itself. They make events, circumstances, and people change around them, and the character in their journey can guide the audience through the story and create an engaging and fulfilling experience. But Rings of Power does the exact opposite. It puts story first, making events and circumstances morph and change in order to placate the character and help them out of their problems. And that creates huge problems because it forces characters to do and say things that don't really make any sense for them. For example, when we meet Galadriel in those first episodes, we find out that she seeks vengeance for her fallen brother and chases Sauron in the far reaches of the world. We are told she's commander of the northern armies and she's supposed to be a powerful person amongst the elves. But there are no armies by her side. She's commander in name only, with only a handful of soldiers with her. And these soldiers have no supplies, no horses, no tents to camp, nothing. This sequence has no internal logic, it exists just for show, so they can have an action sequence at the start of the series. Galadriel herself is arrogant, narcissistic and headstrong. She doesn't listen to her comrades when they ask her to stop and rest, and she keeps pushing on because she is sure she will find Sauron and his army of orcs. Alright, let's examine this claim. Galadriel only has about a dozen soldiers with her. What exactly does she plan to do if her party does indeed find Sauron? How will they fight them? How will they run away since they don't even have horses with them? The answer simply is they wouldn't. They would all die. They don't have the numbers or the will or even the strength after such a long trek to fight an entire army by themselves. And that's why Galadriel's soldiers are pissed off at her. She's gonna get them killed. But this is where plot comes first and character second. There was never an actual danger for Galadriel and her soldiers. They find themselves to Sauron's hideaway just because the show want Galadriel to fight and kill the cave troll and look mighty and strong and cool in the process. But in the end, she looks none of that because basic physics like gravity are a thing that turns on and off, and we are watching a quasi-animated fight scene that doesn't really belong in a live-action fantasy series, and it would fit better in an anime or a Hong Kong wire fu film. And furthermore, Galadriel doesn't move and fight with her soldiers as one thing, as a unit, which is, something that you would expect from a band of soldiers that has been together for months or even years. Plot first, character second happens again and again in Rings of Power. The show needs Galadriel to find herself in the middle of the ocean, so she can stumble upon Halbrand. And in order to place her there, they have to bend themselves backwards, with first sending her to Valinor, then she has to change her mind and jump to the sea before entering the Undying Lands. Now, am I going to point out that for her to jump off the ship is dumb as fuck because she's hundreds of miles away from the shore? Oh yes, I will. Rings of Power gives zero fucks for things that make sense within the story. The plot wants Galadriel to meet Halbrand in the middle of the ocean, so they can be rescued by Elendil, so they can find themselves to Númenor. It's one annoying contrivance after another. And what does Galadriel do when she arrives in Númenor? As someone who is alone, who has no companions, no army, and who needs help to get back to the land of the elves. Is she polite and courteous and diplomatic when she meets the Queen of Númenor? Just do the basic things in order to get what she wants. No, she does none of that. Galadriel basically threatens Queen Miriel, and Halbrand has to intervene so she doesn't get sent to the dungeons. Galadriel's behavior, and in general how the elves are portrayed in Rings of Power, have little to do with how the elves were portrayed in Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings. They are not the wise and ethereal creatures that we once knew. The elves are thousands of years old. In all this time, supposedly, they should have learned to be patient and diplomatic and wise. Galadriel should know by now to, maybe read the fucking room and not piss off the one person that can help her. But Galadriel isn't the only elf that has attitude problems. Both her and Arondir behave like impulsive teenagers. They constantly keep making stupid decisions, and there is not one intelligent thought behind their actions. For example, when Arondir and the widow he's courting, simping, I'm gonna let you decide that. When they find a small tunnel in a nearby parent village, Arondir decides to investigate and jumps inside. Now, someone like him, who is probably hundreds of years old or maybe even more, and has seen and lived through some shit, should have recognized that this is an orc tunnel and it's dangerous and just plain stupid to just jump inside. That in the small space he's in, he can't use any weapon but a knife, and that really won't do much to help him anyway when something goes wrong. The logical and wise thing to do would be to call for help and go down the tunnel alongside his fellow soldiers. But the plot needs Arondir captured by the orcs, so we can see they're building tunnels and are being led by a mysterious evil leader. And because of all of that, you have to make one of your main characters seem dumb as fuck and get captured because the plot demands it so. As for Arondir as a character, he's about as complex and interesting as a half-eaten Mars bar. He can shoot arrows and stare at a distance all grim and stoically, but that's about it. Wherever he goes and whatever he does, there's always the widow nearby, and she dictates everything he does. Poor fella, an immortal elf soldier stranded in the countryside and simped by the widow of the village. Not exactly what I would like from a Lord of the Rings story, but what the hell, to each his own, they say. I wonder if she will suggest a polyamorous relationship for the next season, because the show must reflect the values of the real world and not of Middle-earth. Now, the thing is, there is a bizarre problem with virtually all the female characters in this show. They are written and portrayed as strong women that go their own way and don't listen to anyone. Galadriel, the widow, the queen of Numenor, they are women that take charge, they make decisions. But the thing is, all their decisions ultimately lead their people to ruin and death. Let me explain. When Galadriel lands in Numenor, she hears orcs are on the move, so she presses Queen Miriel for an army. And to sweeten the deal, she suggests to restore Halbrand as king of the Southlands, a useful ally for the years and the wars to come. So after some back and forth, Queen Miriel decides to listen to Galadriel, and the army of Numenor gathers so they can sail to the Southlands. But the thing is, that army consists of only 500 knights. That is not an army, that is barely a vanguard. And after the boyfriend of Isildur's sister, another simp, for fuck's sakes, this is a show filled with simps. What the hell is wrong with the writers? Anyway, let's call him the Numenorian simp. He wants to stop the army from leaving, so he torches 2 out of the 5 ships before Isildur manages to stop him. But because he is weak and a coward, he doesn't betray him to Elendil. And now the army of Numenor is only 300 men. Again, not an army. In an average Sunday, you will find more hooligans in a Greek football match than the whole army of Numenor. And also I want to point out how stupid it is for Numenor to actually send this little army against the orcs. Numenor has no idea how many orcs they will face. They have zero information. From their point of view, the orcs could be thousands or tens of thousands, and that makes their decision to go to war just foolish and stupid. But the show needs Galadriel and her tiny army to be at the Southlands, so they can save the villagers at the very last moment. Rings of Power doesn't really care enough to give us a coherent story that makes sense, one that has consequences for their characters, and doesn't need plot to save them. Now let's go back for a minute and see the events that led to this battle from Arondir and the widow's point of view. At some point her son had found a bullshit MacGuffin, the broken sword of Sauron, so the orcs want it back, and that's why they're chasing them all this time. That becomes quite known early in the episodes when the villagers flee to the nearby tower to escape the orcs. There, the widow makes an empowering speech to the villagers to stand and fight and protect their homes, which makes zero fucking sense, since the villagers are just everyday people, not soldiers. They have no experience, no training, no weapons, and the orcs are just hours away. The villagers should have been running as fast as they could, not standing to fight. It makes no sense, and furthermore, since we know that the orcs want the sword of Sauron, just have Arondir get on a horse and ride away, so he can lead the orcs away, and that will allow the villagers to escape unharmed. And that would work really well for his character as the major simp that he is. He would end up saving the widow and her son. But no, the widow wants blood on her hands, and that's exactly what she's getting. The orcs come, kill everyone, well, almost everyone, until at least the army of Numenor comes and rescues them. Then in a ridiculous scene, the bullshit MacGuffin sword is used as a way to get the volcano to erupt and make the whole region a hellish wasteland. Seriously, this is how Mordor becomes Mordor? Because some guy named Steve or something puts a sword in a 1,000 years old Lego mechanism? Fuck off, really. And in the end, when the volcano dust settles, what are the consequences for our female main characters? Galadriel, the widow, Queen Miriel, they are all failures. All the decisions that they took so far, Galadriel foolishly jumping into war, taking Queen Miriel with her, the widow demanding the villagers to stay and fight, all of that have led only to death and destruction. Now, some details before I'm done with this video. When the orcs fall for the trap inside the watchtower and then get crushed by the falling debris, all of that is done really sloppy. I mean, it's meant to be a smart move from the villagers, but how exactly did they make it happen? Let's think about the reasoning behind this decision. They need the orcs to be under the watchtower, and they need a mechanism that will be engaged from a single source at the right time. The rope that gets burned from the arrow, and that will end up collapsing the tower and killing a bunch of orcs. The next question we need to ask is, okay, the widow has a nice plan and all, but who exactly will make such a mechanism? Is there a character that is some kind of Middle-earth tech whiz? Is there someone that resembles an engineer? A village polymath maybe? No, because no such character exists in Rings of Power. The show doesn't provide a clue as to who made this mechanism. As to the idea that the watchtower was barely held together by the ironwork support and it only took a single arrow to bring it down, well, I would say that is just a ridiculous idea that belongs not in a serious drama, but a cartoon. If this was a serious show, one that takes scenes like that in a careful and thoughtful manner, making that kind of mechanism would easily take half or even the entire episode, and honestly it would be far more entertaining from what we actually end up watching. Details like that are the glue that holds stories together, but Rings of Power has very little regard for them. Consider how little thought has been put into scenes where Galadriel and the soldiers of Númenor are going to war. It doesn't make any sense for them to be wearing their armor on the ship. All that metal easily weighs 20 pounds. It would be exhausting to be wearing it all the time, especially on a trip that takes days. And furthermore, there is no fucking thought behind the very existence of the army of Númenor. Where are their squires, their helpers, their pages, their cooks? All of the people that, make up an army. As many things in this show, it's an army in name only. Now, let's talk about that infamous, ridiculous scene where Galadriel schools the young Númenorian soldiers about sword fighting. Oh man, talk about shooting yourself in the foot. A fight scene like that should serve as an opportunity to show your character their skills, to show Galadriel as a badass fighter, but the scene is so sloppily made and the choreography is so bad that Galadriel comes off not as a warrior, but more like a petulant princess. It is clear that the actress Morfydd Clark can fight, and that's fine and all, but if there is no time for her to train for the part, at least have some respect for your audience and have the character wear a helmet so the stunt team can take over and do their work, like other successful shows have done in the past, like Daredevil. Finally, I have to say that Rings of Power is a mediocre and ultimately disappointing show. There are too many characters, too many storylines, and not one feels important. See you in the next video.